This is lecture 9A for Biology 178, a short lecture covering white blood cells. So in lecture 9, we talked about hematology, including the different formed elements. And the formed element we're going to focus on in this short little lecture are leukocytes. Leukocytes are white blood cells. They are crucial in the body's defense against disease. And unlike thrombocytes, which are platelets, and erythrocytes, which are red blood cells, white blood cells actually are complete cells, meaning they have a nucleus and they have organelles. So they perform all of the major cell functions. Leukocytes are able to move into and out of blood vessels, so they can actually move through different layers of tissue and are not solely confined to blood vessels themselves. They're actually in all of the body fluids. They move into and out of blood vessels and through other tissues via a process called diapedesis. Think about squeezing between cracks in the wall. And that's really what they do. They move between cells and kind of wedge themselves through. And they move through different tissue by ambioid motion. So once they're in blood, they'll actually kind of wiggle their body around like an amoeba and move through the cell, or excuse me, move through the blood or fluid. White blood cells respond to chemicals that are released by damaged tissues. So anytime a tissue is damaged, it typically breaks the basement membrane. And when this breaks the basement membrane, that will release a cascade of chemicals, as we talked about in the process of hemostasis. This signals white blood cells to come by, almost kind of like sending up a signal flare to ask for help when you're out in the middle of nowhere. Typically, there's about 4,000 to 11,000 white blood cells per cubic millimeter of blood, so not nearly as much as there are red blood cells. There are some major conditions associated with abnormal numbers of leukocytes, and they are first, leukocytosis. This is where we have an abnormally high white blood cell count, where we're above 11,000 leukocytes per cubic millimeter of blood. This is normal-ish. It generally indicates an infection, and so the body is producing more white blood cells to help fight it off. And then typically, once the infection is gone, that would return back to normal. On the flip side, we have abnormally low leukocyte levels, which is leukopenia. This is commonly caused by certain drugs such as corticosteroids like cortisol and anti-cancer agents. The body can have leukopenia without different drugs, but it means that the body is very sick and has been dealing with abnormal stress or deficiencies in nutrients, sleep, etc. The final condition is leukemia. Now, a lot of people have heard of this before. It is actually where the bone marrow becomes cancerous and starts to churn out white blood cells. And you'd think, well, isn't this leukocytosis? No. Bone marrow becoming cancerous means that the white blood cells are cancer themselves. Those white blood cells are non-functional. That's really the danger with cancer. Cancer itself is excessive production of cells that have no function. They just keep growing unchecked, uncontrolled, and can't perform normal body functions. So they infect systems and break systems. Leukemia is typically treated with radiation, chemotherapy, etc. Now, there are two major types of leukocytes, granulocytes and agranulocytes. Granulocytes have granules in their cytoplasm that can be stained. Granules themselves are going to look like sand inside of a cell's cytoplasm. And they actually contain different enzymes and chemical compounds that help in their fight against disease. Granulocytes also possess a lobed nuclei, and they include neutrophilus, eosinophilus, and basophilus. Agranulocytes lack cytoplasmic granules and typically have very large spherical, oval, or kidney-shaped nuclei. The nuclei typically is much larger in this case because it deals with pre-programming and fighting against long-term chronic infections or immune system-related function. And the agranulocytes are going to include lymphocytes and monocytes. Now, this is a list of the white blood cells from most to least abundant. Neutrophilus, lymphocytes, monocytes, eosinophilus, and basophilus. So that's going neutrophils being the most abundant in the body and basophils being the least abundant. The easy way I like to remember this is with the mnemonic device, never let monkeys eat bananas. We're now going to go through the three types of granulocytes, their functions, and then the three types, or the two types of agranulocytes and their functions. The first is neutrophilus. Remember, this is the most abundant. It possesses a multi-lobe nucleus with fine granules, and it acts primarily as a phagocyte at the site of infection. So this is going to be the first line of defense soldier in your immune system. The eosinophil has large brick red cytoplasmic granules. It is found in response to allergies and parasitic worms. The basophils have histamine-containing granules and initiate inflammation. Let's take a look at these. Here we can see a neutrophilus. Notice it's got little granules that exist throughout the cell, and it has a multi-lobe nuclei. These are typically seen anytime you're looking at a blood slide and are looking for a white blood cell. Eosinophil, notice it's going to have those larger brick red granules, so the granules will appear larger. This is going to, of course, fight against parasitic worms and allergies. The final type is the basophil. These look very unique and have many dark granules that cover the entire surface of the cell. This is because these granules contain histamine. Histamine initiates inflammation, which can start the overall repair process. Your body actually needs to have inflammation occur because inflammation itself is a signal to start the repair and healing process. As far as agranulocytes, we have the two types, lymphocytes and monocytes. Lymphocytes are a very commonly known cell that has a large, centrally spherical nucleus that fills most of it. These play an important role in the body's immune response. So they're going to deal with pre-programming and the body's immunity. So anytime you've gotten vaccines or things like that, these are programming lymphocytes to be able to fight off this specific type of disease. Monocytes are the largest of the white blood cells, and they function as macrophages, and they are important in fighting chronic infection. Here's a lymphocyte. Notice it's going to have a smoother overall appearance and a huge, large nucleus. Here's the monocyte. Now, while it might look like they're granules, these are just air bubbles that exist inside the pockets. So it's going to be much larger than all of the other types of immune system cells with a very large central nucleus. Something to remember with lymphocytes is that I said that they were programmed, or they deal with the body's immune system response. We have two types of lymphocytes, T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes. Lymphocytes are going to come from lymphoid stem cells and actually then become lymphocytes themselves, and they do so when you are a baby in the thymus, which is a gland that is going to be just right around the sternum. And B lymphocytes are actually programmed in the bone marrow when you're an adult. So this is why the babies will build their immune system up specifically with the thymus. And when you're an adult, you can start to get different vaccines or you have immunity to diseases later on. And this is because the bone marrow actually programs your lymphocytes to fight off these different types of disease. Now remember that the rest of the types of white blood cells, neutrophilus, eosinophilus, basophilus, monocytes, all of those are going to come from the myeloid stem cell, and all of these, the lymphocytes and the myeloid stem cell, the lymphocytes and all of the other types of white blood cells that come from the myeloid stem cell, all of these are actually going to be stimulated by different variations in colony stimulating factor, the cytokine that actually produces these. And that's going to be it for the white blood cell lecture. Please make sure you follow up with the lecture notes on lecture 9A as well.